Hi, my name is Steve Lee. I'm the organizing partner of the Major Group for Children and Youth. And in this video, I want to talk about how the HLPF, High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, works, what its functions are, and how it reviews the Sustainable Development Goals. The HLPF, High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, was created to review the Sustainable Development Goals. The 2030 Agenda, which is the UN General Assembly resolution to look at how we're going to do sustainable development from 2015 to 2030. And big part of that is sustainable development goals. And the HLPF is created to see how well we're doing every year until we get to 2030 in implementing these sustainable development goals. So there are really two purposes to HLPF. There are a few others, and if you look at some of the resolutions, whether it's 70/1, 67/290, et cetera, those will review exactly what the purposes and the structures are. But for the purpose of general understanding, I'm going to focus on two primary purposes of the HLPF. First is to provide political guidance, leadership, and recommendation. The United Nations is an intergovernmental space, meaning it's for national governments. So national governments get together and they talk to each other to figure out how they want to live on this planet together. That's as simple as I can put it. And the High-Level Political Forum's job is to have all the countries get together and provide leadership, guidance on how they can sustainably develop back in their own countries. So it should provide vision. It should provide big picture. It should solve and deal with the most challenging ideas and concepts of how we can achieve the 2030 Agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's the first part, and that's really dealt with through the ministerial declaration that happens at the very end of HLPF. HLPF takes on about 2 weeks. The last 3 days is the high-level segment, where the ministerial declaration is the final outcome document. And that is supposed to go back to all the national governments, to their governments and parliaments and capital cities. Then the politicians will review that, civil servants will review that, and get an idea of what direction the world is trying to go for sustainable development, and each countries will try to do that. And that's what this political leadership, guidance, and recommendation really is. So that's the first part. The second part is to review and see the follow-up of the implementation of 2030 Agenda. 2030 Agenda has 17 Sustainable Development Goals, 169 targets, 231 indicators, and a number of other mechanisms to see how we can best create an inclusive, fair, prosperous, and sustainable future. And the second part here is to look at the follow-up and implementation of how well we're actually on track to do that. So every year we review how well we're doing, and that is the HLPF. So yes, there is the ministerial declaration, and that's the end of it to show where we're supposed to go from here. But everything else looks at reviewing how well we've been doing in the past. The follow-up and review is really where, as we, the non-governments, we're not politicians, we're not elected to lead a government. So as civil society, as non-government, what we can really participate in directly is the follow-up and review. So let me show you how the HLPF is being reviewed. They're being reviewed in 4 ways: regional, national, thematic, and substantive. So let's look at each of these ones. The first is regional. There are 5 RFSDs, Regional Forum on Sustainable Development. So let's look at how those regions are divided. The United Nations has 5 regional economic commissions. There's 5 of them here for Asia Pacific, for Europe and other states, Latin America and Caribbean, Western Asia, which is generally Middle East and North Africa, and then lastly, the rest of Africa. So these are the 5 regions, and each of them kind of can be seen in this map. So each region hosts its own mini HLPF. So HLPF at the global level happens for 2 weeks in July. And then in March, April, each of the 5 regions will host their own mini regional HLPF. So for example, ESCAP, which is the Economic Commission for the region of Asia Pacific, they will host HLPF to review how SDGs are getting implemented in the Asia Pacific region. And each other region will do that. So those happen in March to April, then they get feed into the global HLPF that happens in July. So that's one way it gets reviewed in the regions. Next is thematic. There are different goals that get reviewed each year. So there are 17 goals, and each year it reviews different set of goals. The first time in 2017, it reviewed 6 goals here, 2018, and then 2019. And then this year in 2021, we're reviewing a whole bunch more goals because in 2020, due to COVID, we did not review specific goals. So this year we're in 2021 reviewing more goals than before. So each year, depending on the number of goals we review, we have what's called the EGMs, expert group meetings. So for each goal, there's an EGM. So for example, for this year, there would be an EGM for goal 1, EGM for goal 2, expert group meeting for goal 3, et cetera, et cetera. How does the EGM happen? For each one, there's a lead UN agency that will deal with the issue, and then relevant civil society and stakeholders will be invited to participate in that conversation. So for example, for goal 13, UNFCCC, UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and other UN agencies that are working on climate change will show up to work on the expert group meeting in reviewing how well goal 13 is being implemented as part of 2030 agenda. The other way it gets reviewed is at the national level. So we looked at regional and thematic. Now let's look at national. Each year, countries are invited to do voluntary national reviews, VNRs, voluntary national review. No one is forcing countries to do them. This is inherent nature of how the United Nations works. United Nations is not a world government. United Nations is an intergovernmental space for national governments to get together, to talk to each other, to listen to each other, and to come to solutions among different countries. UN does studies, and they provide research papers, and they provide recommendations. But United Nations cannot go and force any country to do anything. Different countries can meet at the UN, or any other place for that matter. They can meet at a certain place and decide to pressure certain countries to do something. But that just happens to be at the place of UN. The United Nations itself cannot force countries to do anything. So, and this is a really important concept, which I hope you will look more into. Some people think, UN should have more power into forcing countries to do something. Regardless of where people stand on that, currently today, as the UN is, the United Nations cannot force any country to do anything. So again, here, based on that spirit, it's voluntary national reviews. Countries are invited to voluntarily report on how well they're doing in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. So different countries would report each year. About 30, 40, sometimes even close to 50 countries will voluntarily review how well they're doing on the SDGs. In the year of 2021, 44 countries have volunteered to do review on how well they're implementing 2030 agenda, the SDGs in their own countries. So these are the 44 countries. And if you're a young person in one of these countries, or any VNR country for any number of years in the future, if your country is doing VNR, that's an excellent news. Finally, you can get involved with your government directly to review accurately how well or how poorly the government and the country is implementing the SDGs. If you happen to be living in a country that the government does not want to include you in that process, then you have other options. You can work with international organizations or regional organizations who can provide you a space to do those reviews. You can do them yourself. There are oftentimes civil society organizations that will team up together and then provide a parallel report or a spotlight report, a shadow report. They call it different things, but basically government will do their own reviews. But since you don't want us to participate in any of that, we're going to do our own as well. So civil society often will put together their own voluntary national review from the civil society perspective. You can participate in the civil society review, or you could do one as a young person. For children and youth, version of the Sustainable Development Report on how the SDGs are being implemented in your country from young people's perspective. You can do that for all the 17 goals. You can specifically pick issues that are the most important to young people in your country. You can take many different ways, and we're here to help you how to navigate and identify those. But there are many ways you can create these reports and to add pressure as a lobbying and advocacy piece in the future for your country and for your region as well. So far we've looked at three ways: regional, thematic, and national. Lastly is substantive. The Economic and Social Council of the United Nations is one of the 6 major organs of the UN. And the Economic and Social Council reviews a number of substantive sessions. And they feed into the High-Level Political Forum, HLPF, and they inform how we review the 2030 agenda. So for 2021, there are 8 substantive sessions that are relevant to the HLPF. And some of these 8 sessions are on here. And each of these will be conducted as an event and a forum. Then the president of ECOSOC, Economic and Social Council, will draft a summary report for each of these. Then they will be fed into the High-Level Political Forum in July. Which means all of these sessions take place before July in HLPF, because they need to happen before HLPF in order to be reviewed at HLPF. So it starts with the first one with the ECOSOC Youth Forum in April. They continue throughout April, May, June. And then the HLPF takes place in July to review all of them. So as you can see, there are many different ways that the progress on implementation of sustainable development gets reviewed. At the regional level, on 5 RFSDs, Regional Forum on Sustainable Development. Second is through thematic by EGMs, expert group meetings. The number of EGMs depend on the number of goals that get reviewed each year. The third is through, at the national level, through VNRs, voluntary national reviews. And again, that depends on the number of countries that volunteer to review themselves each year. And lastly is the ECOSOC substantive sessions. And that also depends on what the agenda and the vision of the president of ECOSOC is each year. So these 4 areas all feed into HLPF. As you can imagine, the global HLPF in July is really the highest level summit, highest level political summit that reviews everything the world has been doing on sustainable development in the achievement of 2030 agenda. And the July is the point where we actually review all of those things. It's a really, really important event. People, when people think of the United Nations, we think of the General Assembly in September where all the presidents and prime ministers get together. That is the highest level political summit. Arguably, the second one is HLPF. It's less known. It's more, I guess, academic and bureaucratic to nature. We need to change that. HLPF really is the central place where you and I can help the world understand how accurately the Sustainable Development Goals are actually being implemented on the ground. If the governments are painting a more rosier picture, a better picture than it actually is, we as young people need to show not only our country but also the world that the story on the ground, our experiences as young people, is different from how it's being reported. We also need to provide that voice as young people on our experience directly. Yes, others can speak for us as well, but the most authentic stories that have power come from the stakeholders who have experienced that directly themselves. So as young people, we need to tell our own stories. And the places to do that are through these 4 different reviews that happen that feed into the HLPF. HLPF is a really important summit. It's a very important place within the political setting. It not only reviews the past, but it also shows the pathway for how the world ought to move on in the future, every country and every region. So children and youth do have a big place in this. There are many different mechanisms to review and participate in HLPF. One of that is through the major groups and other stakeholders. Major groups and other stakeholders are built into the structure of HLPF to participate in every step of the way, from preparation all the way to its outcome, to shape how sustainable development gets done. One of those major groups is children and youth, and that's who I represent. And as children and youth, any young person between the ages of 0 to 30, as an individual, as an organization, as a group of young people, you're welcome to participate in this process, and we need your voice in order to accurately and representatively show the world what future children and youth, what future we actually want to create a more inclusive, fair, prosperous, and sustainable future. HLPF is really comprehensive. It reviews every aspect of 2030 agenda, not only the 17 goals, 169 targets, and 231 indicators, but there is also a number of other mechanisms, means of implementation, and other reviewing mechanisms that are built into 2030 agenda. I'm not going to go into every aspect of the HLPF. I'm not going to go into the program agenda. I'm not going to go into all the different structures built around it. And some of these are on here. There are more of them out there. Those will be reviewed and discussed together as you participate in relevant channels. The purpose of this video really is to give an overview of what the HLPF is. You can find the link on how to get involved and how to participate in the descriptions below. And hopefully you and I together will be able to shape and participate in the high-level political forum, not only for this year, but for the years to come. Thank you.